People live in the Netherlands. Well, if I were running the show, I would say, how many forces can the Dutch put into the field? How many forces can the Norwegians put in the field? Remember Stoltenberg from Norway, making all these utterly ridiculous and stupid remarks, 90% of which were lies. The same thing with Rutte. You know, anybody who is a real leader in the West would turn to these people and say, shut up and sit down. We, the United States, Washington, have no interest whatsoever in continuing this destructive and pointless war with Russia. So we're not interested in what you have to say any longer. You know, the Germans understood this for years. The Russians have always understood it. At some point, you need to say, put up or shut up.
Europe's problem is clear. The loudest voices pushing for escalation are the ones with almost no military strength to back it up. It's easy to demand a tougher stance on Russia when you know the cost won't fall on you. That's why Macgregor says Washington should have shut this down early. Real leadership means knowing when rhetoric becomes reckless. And at this point, put up or shut up isn't rude, it's reality.
During World War II, when we had 63 divisions in France, the British, including the Canadians, had 19. And the thing that no one on the Soviet side could never understand was why Eisenhower paid any attention whatsoever to what Montgomery and Churchill had to say. They had no skin in the game compared with us. 63 divisions versus 19. Well, you have a similar situation today in Europe. What is your military power? How many forces have you got? The answer to those things is not much, if anything, worthy of attention. So someone needs to tell these people, shut up, sit down, here's the answer. That is what President Trump should do, but he's not doing it. He's not doing it. Now, we can speculate on his donors, the people that really control him, and I think that Witkoff and Kushner are very representative of those donors and their desire to keep this war going with Russia.
The comparison to World War II exposes a long-standing problem. Nations with limited military strength often speak the loudest. Today, Europe faces the same imbalance, where countries with minimal forces still try to shape major strategic decisions. It creates a dangerous illusion of strength that simply isn't there. Someone needs to say it plainly. You can't lead a fight you're not equipped to fight. And instead of pushing back, current leadership seems influenced by donors who prefer keeping this conflict alive.
Germans understand their relationship counts. Germany, as soon as this nonsense finally ends, and I don't think it's going to last too much longer, the Germans are going to move out of NATO. They're going to leave the EU. That's where we're headed. What happens when the Germans leave NATO and the EU? Quick guess, 2-second answer, nothing. It's finished. It's over. It's irrelevant. Okay? That's where we're headed. Donald Trump can either help manage this and control it and drive it in a positive direction, or he can do what he's doing right now. Worry about the optical illusion that he wants to create. Send Witkoff and Kushner over there to help him create good optics for him. His optics don't matter. Here's a big secret that Donald Trump needs to figure out. No one in the United States gives a damn. We're not interested in what these people are doing. Most people on the streets of Kansas City or Seattle, Washington, don't even know this thing called NATO.
The point here is blunt. If Germany walks away from NATO and the EU, the entire structure collapses overnight. That's how central they are. Everything else is built around them. Public opinion in the US barely notices these alliances anymore, which makes the political obsession with optics look even more disconnected from reality. Instead of managing a major geopolitical shift, leaders are focused on appearances. And meanwhile, most Americans don't even know NATO is part of this story at all.
Arrested up in Chicago that were responsible for trying to obstruct ICE, that were directly challenging federal authority in an area where the federal law is clear and unambiguous. None. So he really hasn't acted decisively there, and that's unfortunate. But he does understand it. But when you move beyond the borders of the United States, especially into Europe, I don't think he does. And I think he sees foreign policy the way many presidents do. It offers one of two possibilities. One is to make yourself look good, grand, and powerful, or two, to have your rear end handed to you. Okay. Vietnam handed the rear end to LBJ. And even Nixon, who ultimately extricates us, takes too long to do it and is destroyed as a result on the way out. So the lesson for most presidents ought to be, if you don't have to involve us overseas, don't do it.
This highlights a pattern: strong action at home is promised but rarely delivered, and that hesitation becomes even more visible when the focus shifts overseas. Many leaders still treat foreign policy as a stage for image building instead of a space for real strategy. But history shows the risks. Vietnam ruined presidencies because the goals were unclear and the cost was enormous. The takeaway is simple: if a conflict doesn't truly serve national interests, stay out of it. That lesson keeps repeating, but Washington keeps ignoring it.
I know that President Trump in July of 2017 thought we should get completely out of Afghanistan. He was right. What did he do? He didn't. Because he was too easily seduced by the promise of success on the one hand, and on the other, he didn't feel comfortable taking that position and standing his ground because he really didn't know much about it. What do you do when someone doesn't know much about the subject? You know, Lyndon Johnson in the basement of the White House had a replica of Khe Sanh created, showing where all the defending Marine forces were and where all the North Vietnamese were. He was trying to sort through it, understand it, manage it. How? He didn't know what he was looking at. It could have been, you know, under the Christmas tree, as far as LBJ was concerned. He didn't know anything about that. So part of the problem is that we tend to elect presidents who are good political figures. They understand how to cultivate the public. They understand how to say the right things. They ultimately understand how to get elected. But when it comes to governing, that's a different matter. Sometimes they're okay on the domestic side. Many times they're not. But when it comes to foreign and defense policy and the economy, they fail miserably.
This section shows a common weakness in modern leadership. Presidents often step into major foreign policy decisions without the depth of knowledge. Those decisions demand public image and political instincts, might win elections, but they don't translate into sound strategy. Instead of trusting their initial instincts, leaders often get swayed by advisors promising easy success. History is full of examples where that ends badly, and it's a reminder that governing, especially on foreign policy, requires expertise, not just charisma.
To go back and you've got to look at Paul Wolfowitz, who is really running the show in the Pentagon. You've got to go back to Scooter Libby working with Cheney and Wolfowitz to persuade people that we needed to stay in Afghanistan. And so by the time you get troops and forces, very few of them, but you still got them on the ground in Afghanistan, the focus shifted away from what do we do to eliminate bin Laden, who now is sitting in Pakistan with his little crowd. And it became, we've got to focus on Afghanistan. And there were some people, and I knew them, some of them were classmates of mine, who raised their hands and said, you know, we really don't want to do that. We're going to end up in a war in Afghanistan against the Afghan people. We didn't come here for that. We need to stay out of that. We don't want to engage in what, at the time, the 18th Airborne Corps commander, who had never been anywhere in his life but Fort Bragg, I think his name was McNeil, he kept saying, well, we have to launch search and destroy missions inside Afghanistan. Oh.
This part shows how mission drift happens. Once a few troops are on the ground, the goal quietly shifts from a targeted operation to a full-scale nation-building project. Instead of focusing on bin Laden, the strategy morphed into fighting the entire Afghan population, something many officers warned against from the start. But Washington pushed ahead anyway, guided more by theory than by reality on the ground. It's a classic example of how big decisions get made by people.
Narrative is what counts, not the truth. The narrative is what you are rewarded for repeating. The narrative is an opportunity to enrich yourself and benefit from donors. The truth is irrelevant. And I don't think that President Putin really understands that. So many of the people that are talking, you know, I was reading about members of the Senate who were insisting that Witkoff, for instance, should be considered a traitor to the United States for actually going to Moscow to negotiate, which is an absurd statement. I mean, I'm not a fan of how this president and his makeshift cabinet works, but the notion the man's a traitor because he's trying to help negotiate some deal that'll make Trump look good doesn't make him a traitor. That's nonsense. But we have to understand there's a narrative, and that's the narrative that everybody keeps repeating, and they will repeat it until they can't, and then they'll shut up and they'll walk away and they'll try to hide from the narrative.
This shows how powerful the narrative machine really is. People repeat whatever benefits them politically, even if it has little connection to reality. Anyone who steps outside that script gets labeled, attacked, or painted as disloyal. The goal isn't truth, it's maintaining the storyline. And once that storyline collapses, the same people who pushed it will quietly disappear and pretend they never believed it. It's a cycle we've seen again and again.
Putin is the one man in this drama who ends up coming across as a true humanitarian because he actually gives a damn about the millions of Orthodox Christian Slavs who are being murdered pointlessly in Ukraine. That's a very noble thing. I happen to agree with him. I am not pleased at all with what has happened to Ukraine. I don't see any benefit to Europe or to anyone in the world to see these deaths, or for that matter, the deaths of Russians. It doesn't help us. It doesn't make us strong or great. We don't benefit. The average American doesn't benefit. Then the final point is this. If you go back and look at the famous Battle of New Orleans that elevated Andrew Jackson as a equivalent of what we would call a National Guard general in those days to national hero status, you go and look at the place that was set up as a defense. The defense was brilliantly constructed, and the British stupidly attacked in the wrong place, and they ended up attacking not in these beautiful lines that you see in Hollywood, but holding their muskets over their heads because they were up to their chins in swamp water, trying to reach the 20-foot banks.
This part cuts through the politics and focuses on the human cost that often gets ignored. The tragedy in Ukraine doesn't make anyone stronger, not Europe, not Russia, not the United States. Ordinary people are paying the price, while leaders argue over narratives and prestige. The reminder about the Battle of New Orleans shows how strategy and terrain decide outcomes more than heroic imagery, and it highlights a bigger point. Wars are usually far messier and more senseless than the stories we tell about them.